Blood turned to dust in the parched August air as Naomi Reynolds collapsed to her knees. The auction gavel's cracks splitting her world in two. San Elizario, Texas, 1873, a place where fortunes rose and fell like the relentless sun, and where Naomi's fate now lay in the hands of strangers bidding on what remained of her father's ranch. $500 for the Reynolds land. Do I hear $550? The auctioneer called, his voice carrying across the crowd gathered in the town square. Naomi's fingers dug into the hard, packed earth beneath her, dirt embedding under her nails as she fought back tears. 22 years of life, and everything had come to this moment kneeling in the dirt while vultures circled overhead. Her father's death 3 months prior had revealed a mountain of debt she never knew existed, and the bank had been merciless. 600. Someone called. 650. Another voice shouted. The bidding continued around her as though she weren't even there. Her home, her memories, the only life she'd known, all reduced to numbers shouted across a dusty square. The ranch had been in her family for 2 generations. Now, it would belong to someone else before sunset. $800. A deep voice cut through the chaos, commanding in its resonance. Naomi lifted her head, dust clinging to her tear-stained cheeks. A tall figure stood apart from the crowd, broad-shouldered and backlit by the merciless Texas sun. She squinted, trying to make out his features. 800 going once. The auctioneer's voice held surprise. 800 going twice. No one challenged the bid. The crowd murmured, and Naomi heard whispers of Quinn O'Malley rippling through the onlookers. The gavel fell. Sold to Quinn O'Malley for $800. The crowd began to disperse, some casting pitying glances her way, others avoiding eye contact entirely. Naomi remained on her knees, paralyzed by the finality of it all. She had nowhere to go, no family left, and precious little money to her name. A shadow fell across her, and she looked up to see the man who had just purchased her world. Quinn O'Malley stood before her, his face no longer obscured by the sun. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with eyes the color of a thunderstorm and a face weathered by years under the open sky. His clothes were worn but clean, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his place in the world. "Miss Reynolds," he said, his voice lower now than when he'd been bidding. He extended a hand toward her. "I believe you shouldn't be kneeling in the dirt." Naomi stared at his outstretched hand, pride warring with desperation. "I don't need your pity, Mr. O'Malley." "It's not pity I'm offering." His hand remained steady. "It's respect." Something in his tone made her look more closely at his face. There was no mockery there, no triumph at having acquired her family's land for a fraction of its worth. Instead, she saw something unexpected: compassion. With trembling fingers, she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm and warm as he helped her to her feet. "Thank you," she managed, withdrawing her hand quickly and brushing the dust from her skirt. "Congratulations on your purchase. The Reynolds Ranch is yours." "Actually," Quinn said, reaching into his vest pocket and withdrawing a folded document, "I've already had the lawyer draw this up. I'd like you to look it over." Naomi frowned, taking the paper cautiously. As she unfolded it, her eyes widened. This says you're leasing the property back to me for $1 a month." "Yes, madam. But why would you do that? You don't even know me." Quinn shifted his weight, his spurs making a gentle jingling sound. "I knew your father, Miss Reynolds. Robert was a good man who helped me when I first arrived in San Elizario 5 years ago. I was passing through, broke and hungry, and he gave me work when no one else would." "I don't remember you," Naomi said, studying his face. Her father had often hired drifters for seasonal work, but she couldn't place this man among them. "I worked the north pasture mostly, kept to myself." Quinn cleared his throat. Your father spoke of you often, said you were the strongest person he knew after your mother passed. The mention of her mother sent a familiar pain through Naomi's chest. That still doesn't explain why you would do this. I'm not giving you charity, Miss Reynolds. I'm repaying a debt. His gaze was steady. The agreement is straightforward. You continue to run the ranch, keep what you earn. I maintain ownership on paper, but the place remains your home. Naomi stared at the document, her mind racing. And what do you get out of this arrangement, Mr. O'Malley? A small smile touched his lips. Peace of mind, knowing I've done right by the man who showed me kindness when I needed it most. Before she could respond, Sheriff Wilson approached, his weathered face creased with concern. Everything all right here, Miss Reynolds? O'Malley. Yes, Sheriff, Quinn answered smoothly. Just discussing the terms of our arrangement with Miss Reynolds. The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly. That's so, he turned to Naomi. You comfortable with this, Miss Reynolds? You're not being pressured. No, Naomi glanced at Quinn, then back to the document in her hands. This strange offer seemed too good to be true, but what choice did she have? Everything's fine, Sheriff. Mr. O'Malley has made me a fair proposition. The sheriff nodded slowly. Well, you need anything, you know where to find me. With a last questioning look at Quinn, he walked away. People are watching, Quinn said quietly, and they'll talk. This town thrives on gossip. Naomi looked around at the dispersing crowd, noticing the curious glances directed their way. Let them talk. I've never much cared for their opinions. Good, Quinn said with a hint of approval. Now, do we have an agreement? He nodded toward the document. Naomi took a deep breath. Mr. O'Malley, I appreciate your gesture, but I can't accept this. I won't live on someone else's charity, no matter how it's dressed up. Then what do you propose? She thought for a moment. A true partnership. You paid for half the ranch, you get half the profits. We work it together and I maintain my independence. Quinn studied her face for a long moment. Your father said you were stubborn. He should know. I learned from him. For the first time that day, Naomi felt a spark of her old spirit returning. All right, Miss Reynolds, a partnership it is. He extended his hand again, this time for a handshake. Shall we shake on it until I can have the lawyer draw up new papers? Naomi took his hand, her grip firm. Deal. As their hands met, she couldn't help noticing the rough calluses that spoke of years of hard work. This was no soft-handed businessman or opportunistic land grabber. Quinn O'Malley worked for a living, just as she did. I'll bring my things to the bunkhouse tomorrow, he said, releasing her hand. You don't have a place in town, he shook his head. I've been staying at the boarding house, but if we're to be partners, I should be at the ranch. Naomi nodded slowly. The bunkhouse is empty. It's yours. As Quinn tipped his hat and walked toward his horse tethered nearby, Naomi watched him go with mixed emotions. She'd come to the auction expecting to lose everything, and instead, she'd gained a business partner, a stranger who'd known her father, and now held the fate of her home in his hands. She had no idea if she could trust Quinn O'Malley, but she knew one thing for certain. She would not remain kneeling in the dirt. Whatever came next, she would face it standing. The following morning dawned hot and clear, the Texas sun already fierce by the time Naomi had finished her chores. She'd been up since before first light, determined to maintain her usual routine despite the upheaval of the previous day. The familiar tasks, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, starting bread dough, helped calm her racing thoughts. She was mucking out the horse stalls when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Stepping into the yard, she shaded her eyes against the sun and watched as Quinn O'Malley rode toward the ranch house, leading a heavily laden pack horse behind him. He dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. "Morning, Miss Reynolds, Mr. O'Malley," she greeted, setting aside her pitchfork. "You're here earlier than I expected. Thought I'd get an early start." He began untying his belongings from the pack horse. "Lot of daylight to use." Naomi nodded. "I'll show you to the bunkhouse." The small building stood about 50 yards from the main house, close enough for convenience but far enough for privacy. It hadn't been used since the last of her father's hired hands had left after his death. Naomi pushed open the door, disturbing a thin layer of dust that danced in the morning light streaming through the windows. "It needs airing out," she said, moving to open the windows. "But it's solid. No leaks, even in the worst storms." Quinn set his saddlebags on one of the bunks. "It's more than suitable." He glanced around the simple space with its 4 bunks, small table, and potbelly stove. "I've slept in far worse." Naomi leaned against the doorframe. "The papers from your lawyer, when will they be ready?" "I sent word this morning. Should have them by tomorrow." Quinn hung his hat on a wall peg. "In the meantime, I thought I'd take a look at the north pasture. Your father mentioned water problems there last time we spoke." Naomi's brow furrowed. "When exactly was the last time you spoke to my father, Mr. O'Malley?" Quinn paused in unpacking. "About 6 months ago. I was passing through San Elizario on business and stopped to pay my respects. He mentioned the creek that feeds the north pasture was running low." "It's been a dry year," Naomi confirmed, studying him carefully. "Strange that he never mentioned your visit to me." Quinn met her gaze steadily. Perhaps he didn't think it important enough. There was something in his tone, a careful neutrality that made Naomi suspicious. "My father and I talked about everything, especially the ranch. If he was concerned about the water supply, he would have told me. Maybe he didn't want to worry you, or maybe you're not being entirely truthful with me, Mr. O'Malley." Naomi straightened, crossing her arms. "You appear out of nowhere by my family's ranch and then offer me this unusual arrangement. I think I deserve to know exactly what your connection to my father was." Quinn sighed, setting down the shirt he'd been folding. "You're right. You deserve the truth." He gestured to the small table. "Perhaps we should sit." Naomi hesitated, then moved to take one of the chairs. Quinn sat across from her, his large frame making the simple wooden chair look smaller than it was. "I worked for your father for almost a year, not just passing through as I said yesterday," he began. "It was about 5 years ago after I left the Rangers." "You were a Texas Ranger?" Naomi asked, surprised. He nodded. "For 7 years, I left after." He paused, his eyes momentarily distant. "After an incident that made me question my path, I drifted for a while, ended up here. Your father hired me when I was at my lowest point." "Why didn't you just say that yesterday?" "Because there's more to it." Quinn's fingers traced a knot in the wooden table. "Your father and I kept in touch over the years. When I heard he'd passed, I came back to pay my respects, but you were in Austin visiting your aunt." Naomi remembered that trip, a desperate attempt to secure a loan from her mother's sister, who had regretfully turned her away. "How did you know I was gone, Mrs.? Hernandez at the general store mentioned it. That's also when I learned about the ranch's financial troubles." Quinn looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "Your father wrote to me a month before he died. He was worried about the mortgage, about what would happen to you if he couldn't turn things around." Naomi felt her throat tighten. "He never told me how bad things were. He wanted to protect you, and he asked me if anything happened to him to look out for you. So yesterday at the auction, I was fulfilling a promise," Quinn finished. "Not out of charity, Miss Reynolds, out of respect for a man who helped me when I needed it most." Naomi was silent for a long moment, processing this new information. Why the deception? Why not simply tell me this from the beginning? "Would you have accepted my help if I had?" Quinn asked quietly. "Would your pride have allowed it?" The question struck uncomfortably close to home. Perhaps not, she admitted, but I still don't appreciate being handled like a child. That wasn't my intention. Quinn's expression was earnest. I simply wanted to honor your father's wishes without making you feel obligated. Naomi stood, needing space to think. Well, now I know, and I appreciate your honesty, belated though it may be. She moved toward the door. The partnership stands, Mr. O'Malley. But from now on, complete honesty between us. No more half-truths or omissions. Agreed, Quinn nodded solemnly. Agreed. As Naomi walked back to the main house, her mind was whirling. Quinn O'Malley was still largely a mystery to her, but at least now she understood his motivation. Whether she could truly trust him remained to be seen, but something about his story rang true. She paused on the porch, looking back at the bunkhouse where Quinn had resumed unpacking. Her father had trusted this man enough to ask him for help. For now, that would have to be enough. The days that followed fell into a rhythm as Naomi and Quinn established their working partnership. True to his word, Quinn brought new partnership papers from the lawyer in town, this time splitting ownership of the Reynolds ranch equally between them. These look fair, Naomi said, reviewing the documents at the kitchen table 3 days after the auction. Though I'm still not entirely comfortable with the arrangement. Quinn, seated across from her, tilted his head in question. How so? You paid $800 for the entire property. Now you're giving me half for nothing. Naomi set the papers down. It doesn't sit right. You're contributing your knowledge of the ranch, your labor, and your determination, Quinn countered. That's worth more than money. Naomi wasn't entirely convinced, but she signed the papers nonetheless. I'll find a way to repay you properly, Mr. O'Malley. Quinn, he corrected. If we're to be partners, you might as well use my given name. Quinn, then, Naomi said, testing the name, and you should call me Naomi. A small smile crossed his face. Naomi it is. They settled into a working routine that surprised Naomi with its ease. Quinn was a hard worker, up before dawn and rarely stopping before dusk. He repaired fences, tended the livestock, and worked alongside her without complaint or condescension. Unlike some men she'd known, he didn't question her knowledge of ranching or try to take over tasks. She was perfectly capable of handling herself. A week into their partnership, Naomi found Quinn repairing the chicken coop roof, which had been leaking during recent rains. You don't have to do that, she called up to him. I was planning to get to it this afternoon. Quinn hammered in another nail before responding. Already started, might as well finish. He glanced down at her. Unless you'd rather do it yourself, no, it's fine. Naomi watched him work for a moment. You're good with your hands. Had to be, he replied, measuring a piece of wood. Grew up on a small farm in East Texas. If something broke, we fixed it ourselves or did without. Your family's still there? Naomi asked, realizing how little she knew about him despite their daily proximity. Quinn's rhythm with the hammer faltered briefly. No, they're gone now. The finality in his tone discouraged further questions, but Naomi couldn't help wondering what experiences had shaped this quiet, capable man. In the week they'd been working together, he'd revealed little about himself beyond what was necessary for their day-to-day operations. That evening, as they sat on the porch after supper, a habit they'd fallen into despite neither acknowledging it as a routine, Naomi decided to press further. You said you were a ranger for 7 years, she began, rocking gently in her chair. That must have been interesting work. Quinn nodded, his eyes on the darkening horizon. It was challenging, dangerous at times, but worthwhile. Why did you leave? He was silent for so long that Naomi thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. There was a situation in a small town west of here. A group of men had been rustling cattle, intimidating local ranchers. He paused, his fingers tapping restlessly on the arm of his chair. We tracked them for weeks, finally cornered them in a canyon. The order was to bring them in alive if possible. Naomi remained quiet, sensing the weight of the story he was sharing. It went bad, fast. Quinn's eyes were distant, seeing something far beyond the ranch yard. Gunfire everywhere. When it was over, 3 rangers were dead along with all 5 rustlers. He swallowed hard. One of them was just a boy, couldn't have been more than 16. Riding with his older brothers, I think. I was the one who shot him. You were doing your job, Naomi said softly. That's what everyone said. Quinn's voice was hollow. But I kept thinking about that boy's mother, how she'd never see her son again because he made a bad choice, fell in with the wrong crowd. He shook his head slowly. I turned in my badge the next day. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of his confession. Naomi hadn't expected such a personal revelation, and it shifted something in her perception of him. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. Quinn nodded, his gaze returning to meet hers. "Your turn." "My turn." "Fair's fair. I shared something personal, now it's your turn." Naomi considered for a moment. "What do you want to know? Why were you alone?" Quinn asked. "When your father died." No husband, no suitors. The question was direct, almost blunt, but Naomi found she didn't mind. "There was someone once. Thomas Blackwell, son of a banker in Austin. We met when I was visiting my aunt 3 years ago." "What happened?" "He came to visit me here, took one look at ranch life and decided it wasn't for him." Naomi smiled wryly. "Said he couldn't imagine his wife smelling of horse and hay. Offered to take me back to Austin, set me up in a nice house in town while he worked at his father's bank." "And you declined?" "This land is part of me, Quinn. I couldn't abandon it, not even for the security he offered." She looked out over the darkened ranch, the shapes of the outbuildings familiar even in the growing darkness. "After Thomas, I focused on helping my father run the place. Never really considered another suitor." Quinn was quiet for a moment. "Your father would be proud of your dedication." The simple statement touched Naomi more deeply than she expected. "I hope so." As the night settled around them, Naomi realized they'd taken an important step from reluctant business partners to something approaching friendship. The thought was both comforting and unsettling. She'd grown accustomed to her independence, to making decisions without consulting anyone. Having Quinn in her life on her land changed that dynamic in ways she was still trying to understand. When she finally bid him good night and returned to the empty house, Naomi found herself less lonely than she had been since her father's death. It was a strange feeling, not entirely unwelcome, but unfamiliar enough to give her pause. The next morning brought new challenges. Naomi was checking the water trough in the main corral when she heard a commotion from the direction of the road. Looking up, she saw a cloud of dust approaching, eventually resolving into 3 riders. Quinn emerged from the barn, a coil of rope over his shoulder. "Visitors." "Seems so," Naomi replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Not expecting anyone, though." As the riders drew closer, Naomi recognized the man in front, Victor Sanderson, owner of the largest ranch in the county, and a man who'd made no secret of his desire to absorb smaller operations like the Reynolds place into his growing empire. "Miss Reynolds," Sanderson called as he reined in his horse. He was in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and the ruddy complexion of a man who spent more time giving orders than working outdoors himself. "Good to see you still about the place. Heard you had some excitement at the auction last week." "Mr. Sanderson," Naomi acknowledged coolly. "What brings you to our ranch today?" Sanderson's gaze shifted to Quinn, who had moved to stand beside Naomi. "Heard you had a new partner." The way he said the word carried insinuation. "Came to introduce myself." "Victor Sanderson," he said, extending a hand toward Quinn. I own the double S just north of here. Quinn O'Malley, Quinn replied, shaking the offered hand briefly. Co-owner of the Reynolds Ranch. O'Malley. Sanderson rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Can't say I've heard the name around these parts before. I'm not surprised, Quinn said evenly. I tend to mind my own business. Sanderson's smile didn't reach his eyes. Well, it is my business when a stranger shows up and starts buying land in my county. He turned back to Naomi. Miss Reynolds, I was sorry to hear about your father's passing. Robert was a fine man, if not the most prudent businessman. Thank you for your condolences, Naomi replied stiffly, though I'm not sure what you mean about my father's business sense. Just that these small ranches are becoming less viable by the year, Sanderson said, gesturing expansively. The future belongs to larger operations with the capital to weather the hard times. We're doing just fine, Naomi countered. For now, perhaps. Sanderson's tone was patronizing. But I came with a proposition that might interest you both. I'm prepared to offer $1,200 for the Reynolds place, a 50% profit on your investment, O'Malley, and a fair price considering the property's condition. Naomi bristled. The ranch isn't for sale, Mr. Sanderson. Perhaps you should discuss it with your partner before dismissing my offer so quickly, Sanderson suggested, his gaze sliding to Quinn. It's a generous proposal, especially with the drought likely to worsen. The lady said the ranch isn't for sale, Quinn stated firmly. And as her partner, I stand by that decision. Sanderson's expression hardened. You might want to reconsider. Small ranchers are finding it increasingly difficult to get their cattle to market these days. Trails crossed by private property, water rights disputed. He shrugged. It's becoming a complicated business. Is that a threat? Quinn asked quietly. Merely an observation of the changing times. Sanderson gathered his reins. My offer stands for 1 week. After that, well, property values have a way of declining when times get tough. He touched the brim of his hat. Good day, Miss Reynolds. O'Malley. As Sanderson and his men rode away, Naomi turned to Quinn. What was that about? Why would he suddenly want to buy the ranch now? Quinn's eyes were still on the retreating riders. Could be several reasons. Maybe he sees value you don't realize is here, or maybe he just doesn't like the idea of competition. He looked down at her. One thing's certain, he's not a man used to hearing the word no. Well, he'd better get accustomed to it, Naomi said firmly. This land has been in my family for 2 generations. I'm not selling, no matter what kind of pressure he applies. Quinn nodded, a small smile touching his lips. I don't doubt that for a moment. You agree, then, about not selling? Naomi searched his face. You could make a quick profit, as he pointed out. Naomi, Quinn said seriously, I didn't buy into this ranch to sell it to the highest bidder. I'm here because I made a promise and because I believe in what we're doing here. He paused. But Sanderson's warning troubles me. Men like him play by different rules. What do you think he'll do? I'm not sure yet, but we should be prepared for difficulties. Quinn's expression was thoughtful. Let's ride the boundaries today, check all the water access points. I want to make sure we understand exactly what we're defending. As they prepared their horses for the boundary ride, Naomi found herself grateful for Quinn's steady presence. Sanderson's visit had unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. The neighboring rancher had always been cordial to her father, never showing any interest in their modest property before. Why now? She wondered aloud as they rode side by side along the eastern boundary. The ranch hasn't changed. The land is the same as it's always been. Quinn was quiet for a moment. Maybe it's not about the land itself. Could be about water rights, access to the trails. He glanced at her. Or maybe it's about you. Me. A woman alone, running a ranch. Some men see that as an opportunity. Quinn's tone was matter of fact. Sanderson might have been biding his time, waiting for you to struggle, assuming you'd eventually sell out of necessity. And now that I'm not alone, now he's reassessing. Quinn guided his horse around a patch of prickly pear. My presence changes his calculation. Naomi pondered this as they continued their inspection. By midday, they'd covered the eastern and southern boundaries, stopping at a small creek that marked the property line. Dismounting to let the horses drink, Naomi watched Quinn as he knelt to examine something on the ground. The morning sun caught in his dark hair, highlighting strands of auburn she hadn't noticed before. In the week since he'd arrived, she'd become increasingly aware of him as more than just a business partner. The breadth of his shoulders, the grace with which he moved despite his size, the quiet intelligence in his storm-gray eyes. "Something wrong?" she asked, noticing his frown. Quinn pointed to tracks in the mud near the creek. "Cattle came through here recently, more than just a few strays. Sanderson's, most likely. His brand is an S with a line through it. He's grazing his cattle on our land." Naomi moved closer to examine the tracks. "Looks that way." Quinn stood, dusting off his hands. Not unusual for some drift between neighboring ranches, especially near water sources, but this many tracks suggests it might be deliberate. Naomi felt her temper rising. "That's theft." "It's a statement," Quinn corrected. "Establishing presence, testing boundaries." He looked downstream. "Let's follow the creek, see where they crossed back." They mounted up and followed the cattle tracks along the creek. After about a quarter mile, they discovered where the herd had crossed back onto Sanderson's property. "Recent, but not from today," Quinn observed, examining the churned earth. "Probably moved them after hearing about the auction result." "So what do we do?" Naomi asked. Quinn swung back into the saddle. "For now, we document it. If it happens again, we address it directly with Sanderson." He smiled grimly. "And we make sure our boundaries are clearly marked. No room for misunderstandings." They spent the remainder of the day checking the western and northern boundaries, finding 2 places where fence lines had been cut and hastily repaired. "Deliberate," Quinn said, examining the clean cuts in the wire. "This wasn't weather damage." By the time they returned to the ranch house, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. Naomi was tired and dusty, but more troubled by what they'd discovered than by the physical exertion. "I never thought it would come to this," she said as they unsaddled their horses. "My father always got along with the neighboring ranchers, even Sanderson." "Times change," Quinn replied. "And Sanderson clearly has plans that involve your land, willing or not." That night, after a quiet supper, they again found themselves on the porch. The evening was cooler than usual, a welcome relief after the heat of the day. "What will we do if Sanderson escalates?" Naomi asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Quinn leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "We stand our ground, legally firmly but without provocation." He glanced at her. "I've seen range wars start over less. That's not a road we want to travel." "No," Naomi agreed. "But I won't be bullied off my land either." "Our land," Quinn corrected quietly. Naomi looked at him, really looked at him in the fading light. "Yes, our land." The words felt strange and right at the same time. "Quinn, I haven't thanked you properly for what you did at the auction. I was not myself that day." "You were dealing with an impossible situation the best way you could," he said simply. "No thanks necessary." "Nevertheless, I am grateful," Naomi hesitated, "and I'm glad you're here, not just because of Sanderson, but it's good not to be alone." Quinn's expression softened. "For me as well." There was something in his voice, a warmth that hadn't been there before, that made Naomi's heart beat a little faster. She looked away, suddenly self-conscious. "We should get some rest," she said, rising from her chair. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Quinn nodded, standing as well. "Good night, Naomi." "Good night, Quinn." As she prepared for bed that night, Naomi found her thoughts returning to Quinn. In just over a week, he'd gone from stranger to partner to, something she wasn't quite ready to name. She trusted him. She realized not just with the ranch, but with her safety, her future. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it brought an unexpected sense of peace as she drifted off to sleep. Morning came with the sound of distant gunshots. Naomi bolted upright in bed, momentarily disoriented before recognizing the sharp crack of rifle fire. Throwing on her robe, she rushed to the window. In the early dawn light, she could make out riders at the far edge of the south pasture. She dressed hurriedly, grabbing her father's old shotgun from the closet before running downstairs. Quinn was already in the yard, rifle in hand, saddling his horse. "3 riders," he said without preamble. "They've been shooting at our cattle." "Killing them?" Naomi asked, horrified. "Scattering them, mostly, trying to drive them off our land and onto Sanderson's." Quinn tightened the cinch on his saddle. "Stay here." "I will not," Naomi countered, moving toward the small stable to saddle her own horse. "This is my ranch, too." Quinn looked like he wanted to argue but simply nodded. "Stay behind me, then." They rode hard toward the south pasture. As they approached, the gunfire stopped, and Naomi could see the riders retreating toward Sanderson's property. "They're running," she called to Quinn. "They've done their damage," he replied grimly. When they reached the pasture, the extent of that damage became clear. While only a few cattle had been shot, the entire herd had been scattered in panic, many breaking through the fence line into neighboring properties. "This will take days to sort out," Naomi said, dismounting to examine a wounded steer. The animal had been shot in the hindquarters but was still alive, bellowing in pain. Quinn knelt beside the injured animal, checking the wound. "We'll have to put it down. The bullets lodged deep." "Those bastards," Naomi whispered, anger replacing her initial shock. "This was Sanderson's doing." "Almost certainly," Quinn agreed, "though he'll deny any knowledge of it." "What's our next move?" Quinn stood, his expression hard. "First, we deal with the immediate problem. Round up as many cattle as we can, tend to the injured, report this to Sheriff Wilson. And then we pay Sanderson a visit." Quinn's voice was quiet but held an edge Naomi hadn't heard before. "Not for confrontation, but to make our position clear." They spent the morning rounding up scattered cattle, a task made more difficult by the animals' frightened state. By midday, they had recovered about half the herd and discovered 2 more injured animals that needed to be put down. Sheriff Wilson arrived shortly after noon, having been alerted by a neighboring rancher who'd witnessed the raid. "This is serious business," the sheriff said, surveying the damaged fence line and the dead cattle. "But proving Sanderson's involvement will be difficult. His men won't talk and he'll have an alibi." "We don't need proof for a court," Quinn said. "We just need him to know we won't be intimidated." The sheriff gave Quinn a measuring look. "I heard you were a ranger once, O'Malley. You know how these things can escalate." "I do," Quinn acknowledged. "Which is why we'll handle this carefully." After the sheriff departed, promising increased patrols but offering little hope of justice, Naomi and Quinn continued their work. By sunset, they had recovered most of the scattered herd and repaired the worst of the fence damage, but both were exhausted. "We should wait until tomorrow to see Sanderson," Naomi suggested as they rode back to the ranch house. "When we're rested." Quinn nodded his agreement. "First thing in the morning, then." That evening, bone-tired and grimy from the day's work, Naomi heated water for baths. After Quinn had used the kitchen tub and returned to the bunkhouse, she sank gratefully into the warm water, letting it soothe her aching muscles. As she bathed, her mind returned to the events of the day, not just the cattle raid, but Quinn's response to it. He had been calm but resolute, focused on solving the immediate problems rather than rushing off for revenge. It was a maturity she appreciated, especially given the circumstances. Clean and dressed in a fresh nightgown and robe, Naomi was combing out her damp hair when a knock came at the door. Curious and a little wary, she took her father's shotgun from its place by the door before calling out, "Who is it?" "It's me," Quinn's voice answered. Naomi set the shotgun aside and opened the door. Quinn stood on the porch, freshly changed into clean clothes, his hair still damp from his bath. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Yes, He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "I wanted to make sure you were doing all right after today." The simple gesture of concern touched her. "I'm fine. Tired and angry, but fine." Quinn nodded, his eyes taking in her damp hair and robe before quickly looking away. "Good, that's good." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with things neither seemed ready to say. "Would you like to come in?" Naomi finally asked, surprising herself with the invitation. "I could make some coffee." Quinn shook his head. "No, I should let you rest." He started to turn away, then paused. "Naomi, tomorrow when we see Sanderson, let me do the talking." "You think I can't handle Sanderson?" she asked, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "I think you'd handle him too well," Quinn replied with a small smile. "And while I admire your spirit, we need to be strategic, not satisfying." Naomi considered his words. "All right, but I'll be right beside you, not hanging back like some delicate flower." "I wouldn't expect anything less." Quinn's smile widened briefly before his expression grew serious again. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow won't be easy. Good night, Quinn." As she watched him walk back to the bunkhouse, Naomi was struck by the realization that in just over a week, this man had become essential to her world in a way she never could have anticipated. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. Morning brought clear skies and a sense of purpose. After a quick breakfast, Naomi and Quinn rode toward the Double S Ranch house, a sprawling two-story structure that stood as a testament to Victor Sanderson's wealth and influence in the county. "Remember," Quinn said as they approached, "we're here to establish boundaries, not start a war." Naomi nodded, though her anger at the previous day's events still simmered beneath the surface. "I'll follow your lead." They were met in the yard by one of Sanderson's hands, who eyed them warily before going to announce their arrival. Minutes later, Sanderson himself emerged onto the wide front porch. "Miss Reynolds, O'Malley," he greeted them with false cordiality. "This is an unexpected pleasure. To what do I owe the visit?" Quinn dismounted smoothly, then moved to help Naomi down, though she hardly needed the assistance. The gesture, she realized, was as much for Sanderson's benefit as hers establishing their united front. "I think you know why we're here, Sanderson," Quinn said, his voice level but firm. "3 of your men raided our south pasture yesterday morning. They scattered our herd and killed several head of cattle." Sanderson's expression remained neutral. "That's a serious accusation, O'Malley. Do you have any proof these men were mine?" "They rode from your land and returned to it," Naomi stated, unable to remain silent despite her promise. "And they conveniently appeared just after you made an offer for our ranch." "Circumstantial at best," Sanderson replied with a dismissive wave. "Cattle rustlers are common in these parts. Perhaps you should focus on improving your security rather than making baseless accusations against your neighbors." Quinn took a step forward. "Let's be clear, Sanderson. We're not here for denials or legal arguments. We're here to tell you directly. The Reynolds Ranch is not for sale. Not now, not ever. Any further attempts to intimidate or pressure us will be met with resistance." "Intimidate?" Sanderson's laugh held no humor. "My dear fellow, if I wanted your land badly enough to resort to intimidation, I wouldn't send men to scatter a few cows. There are much more effective methods available to a man in my position." "Is that a threat?" Naomi demanded. Sanderson turned his cold gaze to her. "It's a reality check, Miss Reynolds. This county operates by certain unwritten rules. Your father understood that, even if he was too stubborn to accept my previous offers." "Previous offers?" Naomi frowned. "You never made my father an offer for our land. Didn't he tell you?" Sanderson's smile was smug. "I approached Robert 3 times over the past 2 years. He refused each time, though the final offer was quite generous." Naomi glanced at Quinn, whose expression remained carefully neutral. "My father never mentioned any offers from you." "Because he knew what this land meant to you," Sanderson said smoothly. "He knew you'd never agree to sell, no matter how dire the financial situation became." The revelation that her father had kept such significant information from her was unsettling. Had there been other secrets, other burdens he'd carried alone? "Whether he received offers or not is irrelevant," Quinn interjected, clearly sensing Naomi's distraction. "Our position remains the same. The ranch is not for sale, and we expect you to respect our property rights." Sanderson studied them both for a long moment. "Very well, I'll make a note of your determination." He straightened his vest. "Now, if there's nothing else, I have business to attend to." "One more thing," Quinn said as Sanderson turned to go. "If any more of your men are found on our land without invitation, or if there are any more incidents with our cattle, we won't be coming here for conversation next time. We'll be going straight to the U.S. Marshal in El Paso." "I still have friends in the Rangers who would take a particular interest in a range war brewing in their territory." The mention of the Rangers caused a flicker of something concern, perhaps, or calculation to cross Sanderson's face before his mask of indifference returned. "Good day, O'Malley." "Miss Reynolds." With a curt nod, Sanderson retreated into his house. The ride back to the Reynolds ranch was quiet, both Naomi and Quinn absorbed in their thoughts. It wasn't until they were unsaddling their horses that Naomi broke the silence. "You believe him about making offers to my father?" Quinn considered the question. "It seems plausible. Your father might have kept it from you to spare you worry." "He kept a lot from me, it seems," Naomi said, a hint of bitterness in her voice. "The mortgage, Sanderson's offers, how bad things really were." "He was trying to protect you," Quinn suggested gently. "By keeping me ignorant." Naomi shook her head. "That's not protection, that's treating me like a child." Quinn was quiet for a moment as he hung up his saddle. "When my father was dying, he sold off pieces of our farm bit by bit to pay for medicine for doctors. He told us it was just temporary setbacks, that things would turn around." He turned to face her. "By the time he passed, there was almost nothing left. My mother and sisters had to start over with almost no resources because he couldn't bear to tell them the truth." "That's terrible," Naomi said softly. "It was," Quinn agreed. "But I've come to understand that it wasn't pride that drove him, at least not entirely. It was love, misguided though it might have been." He stepped closer. "Your father loved you, Naomi. Everything he did, even his mistakes, came from that love." Naomi felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "I know. I just wish he'd trusted me enough to share the burden." "Some men of that generation believe it's their duty to carry certain burdens alone," Quinn said. "It doesn't make it right, but it makes it understandable." Naomi nodded, grateful for Quinn's insight and the quiet strength he offered. "Do you think we made any impact on Sanderson today?" "Hard to say," Quinn replied honestly. "Men like him don't give up easily when they want something, but we've shown him we're not easy targets, and that counts for something." The rest of the day passed in routine tasks, but Naomi found her thoughts continually returning to Sanderson's revelations and Quinn's response to them. There was a depth to Quinn O'Malley that continued to surprise her, a wisdom born of experience, and a compassion that belied his sometimes stern exterior. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the distant hills, Naomi found herself studying Quinn's profile in the fading light. "What is it?" he asked, catching her gaze. "I was just thinking about how quickly everything has changed," she admitted. 2 weeks ago, I was facing the loss of everything. Now, she gestured vaguely at the ranch around them. Now I have a partner and a determined adversary. "Prefer the old situation?" Quinn asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. "No," Naomi said without hesitation. "Despite everything, this is better." Quinn smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his features. "I agree." As the days turned into weeks, Naomi and Quinn settled into a comfortable rhythm. The immediate threat from Sanderson seemed to have receded, though neither of them believed he had given up entirely. They worked side by side, rebuilding fences, tending to cattle, preparing for the eventual drive to market that would determine the ranch's financial future. In the evenings, they continued their habit of sitting on the porch, sometimes talking late into the night. Naomi learned about Quinn's years as a ranger, his brief marriage to a woman who had died of fever 2 years after their wedding, his wandering afterward as he sought purpose. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood on the ranch, her brief time at a finishing school in Austin, which she had hated, her love for the land that had been in her family for generations. She found herself speaking of things she had never shared with anyone: her fears, her dreams, her determination to make the ranch thrive despite the odds. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd accepted Thomas's proposal," she confessed one evening as they watched a spectacular sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "If I'd gone to Austin, become a banker's wife, had children by now." "Do you regret your choice?" Quinn asked quietly. Naomi considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "I would have withered in that life like a wildflower planted in a careful garden. This," she gestured to the land around them, "this is where I belong." Quinn nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Some people aren't meant for confined spaces." "Like you?" Naomi asked, curious. A small smile touched his lips. "Like me." As September gave way to October, the nights grew cooler, and their conversations on the porch became shorter as the chill drove them inside. One evening, as a particularly cold wind blew in from the north, Naomi impulsively invited Quinn to continue their conversation in the house. "It's getting too cold out here," she said, rising from her chair. "We could have coffee by the fire instead." Quinn hesitated, clearly aware of the impropriety of entering her home at night, even with their established partnership. "People will talk," he said, echoing his words from their first day. "People already talk," Naomi replied with a shrug. "Half the town thinks we're secretly married anyway, according to Mrs. Hernandez at the general store." That drew a laugh from Quinn. "And the other half?" "The other half thinks we're living in sin," Naomi said bluntly. "Either way, my reputation is already compromised in their eyes. Might as well be comfortable while we're being scandalized." After another moment's hesitation, Quinn nodded. "Coffee sounds good." Inside, the house was warm and welcoming. Naomi busied herself with making coffee while Quinn added wood to the fire in the small parlor. It was strange having a man in the house after dark, but not uncomfortable. Quinn's presence filled the rooms in a way that felt right, as though a missing piece had been restored. "Your father built a good house," Quinn observed, looking around the simply furnished but well-constructed room. "Solid." "He built most of it himself," Naomi said, bringing in 2 cups of coffee. "Added to it as the years passed. The original structure was just 2 rooms when my parents first married. Quinn accepted the offered cup with a nod of thanks. You never talk much about your mother. She died when I was 12, Naomi replied, settling into her father's old armchair across from Quinn. Pneumonia took her after a long winter. She was gentle but strong, the kind of woman who could birth a calf in the morning and host the pastor for tea in the afternoon without missing a beat. You take after her, Quinn observed. Naomi smiled at the compliment. I like to think I have some of her strength, yes. They fell into comfortable conversation, the fire crackling in the hearth as the wind whistled around the eaves outside. It was nearly midnight when Quinn finally rose to leave. Thank you for the coffee, he said, standing by the door. And the company. Thank you for braving scandal to provide it, Naomi replied with a smile. Quinn looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim lamplight. Then, with a quiet good night, Naomi, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Naomi stood in the empty hallway, listening to his footsteps recede toward the bunkhouse. Something had shifted between them tonight, though she couldn't quite name what it was. All she knew was that the house seemed emptier than usual after he had gone. The next morning brought news that shattered their brief period of peace. Sheriff Wilson rode out to the ranch just after sunrise, his expression grim. There's been trouble in town, he said without preamble when Naomi met him in the yard. Sanderson's men got into it with the Jenkins boys last night at the saloon. Guns were drawn. Anyone hurt? Naomi asked, alarmed. Young Toby Jenkins took a bullet in the shoulder, the sheriff replied. He'll live, but it's bad business. The Jenkins place borders yours to the west, doesn't it? Naomi nodded. What started it? According to witnesses, one of Sanderson's men accused the Jenkins of helping you round up cattle after that incident last month. Quinn had emerged from the barn and joined them in time to hear the sheriff's explanation. Sanderson's creating division, he said, trying to isolate us from our neighbors. Sheriff Wilson nodded grimly. That'd be my read as well, and there's more. Word is Sanderson's brought in new men from outside the county. Hard cases by all accounts. Hired guns? Quinn asked sharply. Not openly, the sheriff replied, but they aren't cowboys either. After the sheriff departed, promising again to keep them informed, Naomi and Quinn conferred in the yard. This changes things, Quinn said, his expression serious. If Sanderson's bringing in outside men, he's preparing for something more than just intimidation. What do we do? Naomi asked, fear mingling with determination in her voice. We prepare, Quinn replied simply. And we reach out to neighbors we can trust. Sanderson wants to isolate us, so we do the opposite. That afternoon, they rode to the Jenkins ranch to check on young Toby and to speak with his father, Frank Jenkins, a weathered rancher who had been a friend of Naomi's father. They found Toby resting comfortably, his wound painful but not life-threatening, and Frank Jenkins seething with anger at Sanderson. That snake's been pushing all of us smaller ranchers for years, Jenkins said as they sat at his kitchen table. But shooting my boy that crosses a line. We need to stand together, Quinn suggested. Sanderson's counting on dividing us. Jenkins nodded slowly. What do you propose, O'Malley? A mutual aid agreement. If any of us has trouble, the others respond. United, we're harder to pick off one by one. By the end of the day, they had secured agreements from the Jenkins ranch and 2 other neighboring properties. It wasn't a large alliance, but it was a message to Sanderson that his tactics wouldn't isolate the Reynolds ranch as he had hoped. As October progressed, tensions continued to simmer. There were no more direct incidents, but Sanderson's men were frequently seen riding near the boundaries of the Reynolds property, and rumors of more outsiders arriving at the Double S persisted. Naomi and Quinn used the time to prepare checking and reinforcing fences, moving cattle away from boundary areas, and establishing regular patrols of their property. They also began preparations for the cattle drive that would take their marketable stock to the railhead in early November, a crucial journey that would determine the ranch's financial stability for the coming year. Through it all, their partnership deepened. Naomi found herself increasingly aware of Quinn, not just as a business partner or protector, but as a man. The strength in his hands as he worked beside her, the quiet confidence in his decisions, the rare moments when his serious expression would break into a genuine smile, all of these things affected her in ways she hadn't expected. For his part, Quinn seemed to watch her with growing admiration. He respected her knowledge of the ranch and listened to her opinions without dismissing them, even when they disagreed. But there was something more in his gaze at times, something that made her heart beat faster and her cheeks warm. One evening in late October, as they discussed final preparations for the upcoming cattle drive, the unspoken tension between them finally surfaced. "I've been thinking," Quinn said as they sat by the fire in the parlor, a practice that had become their nightly ritual. "About the drive to the railhead." "What about it?" Naomi asked, setting aside the mending she had been working on. "It might be best if you stayed here," he suggested carefully. "With Sanderson still making threats, leaving the ranch undefended would be risky." Naomi straightened. "If you're going with the herd, I'm going too. We're partners, remember?" "I remember," Quinn said, his voice patient. "But this isn't about partnership, it's about strategy. Someone needs to stay behind to protect the ranch, and someone needs to go with the herd." "It makes sense for me to go and you to stay." "Because you're a man and I'm a woman," Naomi challenged. Quinn met her gaze steadily. "Because I have more experience with cattle drives and you have more knowledge of this land. It's about using our strengths efficiently." His logic was sound, but Naomi still bristled at the idea of being left behind. "I've been on cattle drives before, Quinn. My father took me every year since I was 16. "I know," he acknowledged. "And in normal circumstances we'd both go, but these aren't normal circumstances." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Naomi, I'm not trying to control you or protect you because you're a woman. I'm thinking about what's best for the ranch for both of us." Naomi studied his face, looking for signs of patronization or deception, but found only sincerity. "I don't like it," she said finally, "but your reasoning makes sense." Quinn nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Thank you for understanding." "I didn't say I agreed yet," Naomi clarified. "I need to think about it." "Fair enough." Quinn settled back in his chair. Naomi returned to her mending, but her mind was elsewhere. The thought of being separated from Quinn, even temporarily, caused an unexpected ache in her chest. When had his presence become so essential to her sense of security, to her happiness? "Quinn," she said suddenly, setting her mending aside again. "Yes." He looked up, something in her tone catching his attention. "What are we doing here?" she asked softly. "What do you mean, this?" She gestured between them. "Us." These conversations by the fire every night, the way we work together during the day. The partnership started as a business arrangement, but it's more than that now, isn't it? Quinn was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. "Yes," he finally said, his voice low. "It's more than that, at least for me." Naomi's heart pounded in her chest. "For me too." He stood then, crossing the small space between them to kneel beside her chair. "Naomi, I came here to fulfill a promise, but I've stayed for reasons that have nothing to do with promises or partnerships." "What reasons?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. "Because in the short time I've known you, you've become essential to me," Quinn said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. Your courage, your determination, your heart, they've all become part of my world in ways I never expected. Naomi reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I was kneeling in the dirt that day at the auction, ready to lose everything. You lifted me up, gave me hope. Her voice caught. And you've never let me fall since. Quinn turned his face to press a kiss to her palm. I never will. He rose slightly, bringing his face level with hers, his eyes asking a silent question. In answer, Naomi leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer both. When they parted, Naomi saw her own wonder reflected in Quinn's eyes. I've wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted. Why didn't you? She asked, her hand still resting against his cheek. I wasn't sure if you felt the same. And I didn't want you to think I had ulterior motives when I offered the partnership. Naomi smiled. I'm sure that was all part of your cunning plan. Save the ranch, win the girl. Quinn laughed softly. If it was a plan, it wasn't a conscious one. He grew serious again. Naomi, whatever happens with Sanderson, with the ranch, with anything else, know that my feelings for you are real. They're not part of any arrangement or obligation. I know, she said simply, because she did. Whatever else Quinn O'Malley might be, he was a man of integrity. And my feelings for you are just as real. He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hand coming up to cradle the back of her head. Naomi felt herself melting into his embrace, the world narrowing to just this moment, this man. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. I should go, he said reluctantly, before this goes further than either of us intends tonight. Naomi nodded, though part of her wanted him to stay. You're right, she smiled. Always the honorable man. Not always, Quinn admitted with a rueful smile, but with you I want to do things right. He stood, helping her to her feet as well. At the door, he kissed her once more, briefly but with feeling. Good night, Naomi. Good night, Quinn. As she watched him walk toward the bunkhouse, Naomi felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Sanderson, the cattle drive, the uncertain future of the ranch, they would face them together. And that knowledge made all the difference. The days leading up to the cattle drive were filled with intense preparation. Naomi and Quinn worked from dawn until dusk, selecting the cattle for market, ensuring they were in good condition, and finalizing arrangements for the journey to the railhead. They had hired 2 experienced cowhands from a neighboring ranch to assist with the drive, men Quinn had carefully vetted and who had no connections to Sanderson. Their personal relationship, newly acknowledged, added a sweetness to the long days of work. Stolen kisses when no one was watching, lingering touches as they passed tools to each other. Private smiles that held meaning only they understood. These moments sustained them through the exhausting preparations. Naomi had ultimately agreed with Quinn's reasoning about the cattle drive. She would remain at the ranch with Frank Jenkins's eldest son, who had offered to stay and help guard the property during Quinn's absence. The drive would take at least a week, possibly longer if weather or other complications arose. The night before Quinn's departure, Naomi invited him to a special supper in the main house. She had spent the afternoon preparing his favorite dishes: venison stew, cornbread, and apple pie, a fact that touched him deeply when he realized the effort she had made. You didn't have to go to all this trouble, he said as they sat at the dining table, the room warmed by the fire and several oil lamps that cast a golden glow over everything. It's not trouble, Naomi replied with a smile. I wanted to do something special before you leave tomorrow. After supper, they moved to the parlor, where Naomi surprised Quinn again by presenting him with a gift: a new bandana made from fine blue cotton that matched his eyes. Something to remember me by, she said, wrapping it around his neck herself. As if I could forget, Quinn murmured, capturing her hands in his. The evening passed too quickly, and soon it was time for Quinn to return to the bunkhouse for a few hours of sleep before the early departure. At the door, he held Naomi close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Be careful while I'm gone," he said softly. "Jenkins is reliable, but still stay alert." "I will," she promised. "And you be careful on the trail, come back to me safely." "Nothing could keep me away," Quinn assured her. Their kiss goodbye was filled with longing and promise, a pledge to each other that transcended words. When they finally parted, Naomi watched Quinn walk toward the bunkhouse, his figure silhouetted against the starlit sky. "I love you," she whispered, too softly for him to hear. She would tell him properly when he returned, she decided. Some words deserved to be saved for a homecoming. The cattle drive departed at dawn, Quinn leading the small group of men and approximately 60 head of cattle toward the railhead. Naomi watched them until they disappeared over the horizon, then turned back to the ranch house with determination. There was work to be done, and she would not spend the week moping. Young Bill Jenkins arrived mid-morning to help with security as promised. At 20, he was eager to prove himself but had a good head on his shoulders, a combination Naomi appreciated. She set him up in the bunkhouse and outlined their strategy for the coming days: regular patrols of the property boundaries, careful monitoring of the remaining livestock, and vigilance for any signs of trouble from Sanderson's direction. The first 3 days passed without incident. Naomi kept busy with ranch chores and preparations for winter, which would arrive in earnest within a month. Each night, she found herself looking toward the bunkhouse, before remembering that Quinn wasn't there, a realization that brought a pang of loneliness, despite Bill Jenkins's dependable presence on the property. On the 4th day after Quinn's departure, the threat they had been anticipating finally materialized. Naomi was repairing a chicken coop when Bill Jenkins rode in from his morning patrol, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Riders coming," he reported breathlessly, dismounting in a hurry. "At least 6 of them from the direction of Sanderson's ranch." Naomi straightened, her heart racing. "How far out?" "Maybe 15 minutes," Bill replied. "They're not rushing, but they're coming directly this way." "Get your rifle," Naomi instructed, already moving toward the house. "I'll get mine. We'll meet them in the yard, not inside buildings where they could trap us." Minutes later, armed and positioned on the porch with a clear view of the approaching riders, Naomi felt a calm determination replace her initial fear. This was her home, her land. She would not be intimidated off of it. "Should I go for help?" Bill asked, his young face serious beneath the brim of his hat. "No time," Naomi replied. "We stand our ground, but if things go bad, you ride for town as fast as you can, understand?" Bill nodded, his grip tightening on his rifle. The riders appeared on the horizon, moving at a steady pace toward the ranch house. As they drew closer, Naomi could make out Victor Sanderson at the head of the group, flanked by men she didn't recognize, likely the hired guns Sheriff Wilson had warned about. "Stay calm," she murmured to Bill as the riders entered the yard. "Let them speak first." Sanderson reined in his horse about 20 yards from the porch. "Miss Reynolds," he called, his tone falsely cordial. "I see your partner isn't around. Convenient timing for a social call." "This is private property, Mr. Sanderson," Naomi replied, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "State your business or leave." Sanderson smiled thinly. "Direct as always. Very well. My business is simple. I've come to make you one final offer for this land." He gestured around at the ranch. $1,500. That's nearly double what O'Malley paid and more than fair given the circumstances. "What circumstances would those be?" Naomi asked coldly. "The difficulties smaller ranches are having in this region. The unfortunate accidents that seem to befall them." Sanderson's smile didn't reach his eyes. The risk of being caught between larger interests. You mean the risk of being threatened by men like you, Naomi clarified. The answer is no, Mr. Sanderson. This ranch is not for sale at any price. Sanderson's expression hardened. I suspected you might say that. Perhaps a demonstration would help clarify the situation. He nodded to one of his men. Harker. The man named Harker, a hard-faced individual with cold eyes, drew his pistol and fired in one smooth motion. The shot cracked through the air, and Naomi heard the sound of breaking glass behind her the front window of the house. That was a warning, Sanderson said as Naomi and Bill tensed, raising their rifles. The next one won't be aimed at property. You're making a mistake, Sanderson, Naomi said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Quinn will be back within days and he has friends in the Rangers. This won't end well for you. O'Malley is a washed-up former Ranger with a guilty conscience, Sanderson sneered. And he's currently 100 miles away. By the time he returns, this situation will be resolved one way or another. Bill shifted beside Naomi, his young face tense but determined. My pa and brothers know I'm here, he said, his voice only slightly unsteady. If anything happens to us, they'll come looking. The boy has spirit, one of Sanderson's men commented with a cruel smile. Shame if he ends up like his brother. That's enough, Morris, Sanderson said sharply. He turned back to Naomi. I'm a reasonable man, Miss Reynolds. I don't want bloodshed on my conscience. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to give you until sundown tomorrow to reconsider my offer. If you agree, you can ride out with whatever personal possessions you can carry, plus the $1,500. If you refuse, he shrugged. Well, I can't be responsible for what desperate men might do in lawless territory. Naomi kept her rifle trained steadily on Sanderson's chest. This isn't lawless territory. This is San Elizario with a sheriff and a circuit judge. Sheriff Wilson is currently dealing with a situation at the south end of the county, Sanderson replied smoothly. And the circuit judge won't be through for another 3 weeks. A lot can happen in that time. The implied threat hung in the air between them. Sundown tomorrow, Sanderson repeated, gathering his reins. I suggest you use the time wisely, Miss Reynolds. With a nod to his men, he turned his horse and rode out of the yard, his entourage following. As soon as they were out of sight, Naomi lowered her rifle, her hands trembling slightly with reaction. What do we do? Bill asked, his young face pale but determined. Naomi took a deep breath, steadying herself. First, we send for help. Ride to your father's place, tell him what happened. Then both of you go to the Jenkins Ranch to the east and the Petersons to the north. Tell them Sanderson's made his move and we need support. What about you? Bill asked, concerned. I'll be fine for a few hours, Naomi assured him, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. The house is defensible, and Sanderson won't make his move until his deadline. He's too concerned with appearances for that. After Bill had ridden out, Naomi set about preparing the house for a potential siege. She moved furniture to block windows, brought in extra water and food from the storage shed, and gathered all the ammunition she could find. As she worked, her mind raced, calculating distances and timing. Quinn and the cattle drive would be at the railhead by now, perhaps already on their way back. But even at the fastest pace, they couldn't return before Sanderson's deadline. She would have to rely on the neighboring ranchers and her own courage until then. As the afternoon faded into evening with no sign of Bill's return, Naomi began to worry. Had Sanderson's men intercepted him? Were the other ranchers unwilling to risk Sanderson's wrath by helping her? Darkness fell, and Naomi moved through the house with a lamp, checking her preparations one final time. She was securing the back door when a noise from outside made her freeze. The sound of approaching horses, moving quietly, extinguishing the lamp. Naomi moved to a window, peering cautiously between the curtains. In the moonlight, she could make out riders approaching from the east, at least 4 of them. Her heart pounded as she reached for her rifle. Had Sanderson decided not to wait for his deadline after all? A low whistle sounded from outside, 3 notes in a pattern she recognized as a signal the local ranchers used to identify themselves to each other. Relief washed over her as she moved to the front door. "Who's there?" she called, rifle still ready. "Frank Jenkins and Company," came the reply. "Bill said you might need some neighbors about." Naomi opened the door to find Frank Jenkins, his youngest son, and 2 men from the Peterson ranch standing on her porch. "Thank God," she breathed. "I was beginning to think Bill hadn't made it through." "He made it just fine," Frank assured her. "Got the rest of our boys securing the perimeter now. Thought you might like to know you're not alone." Tears of relief and gratitude stung Naomi's eyes. "I can't thank you enough." Frank shook his head. "No need for thanks. Your father would have done the same for any of us. Besides, it's time someone stood up to Sanderson. Man's been pushing his weight around this county for too long." By midnight, a small force of local ranchers and their hands had assembled at the Reynolds ranch, 15 men in all. Not a large army, but a significant show of solidarity against Sanderson's threats. "We'll keep watch through the night," Frank told Naomi as they gathered in the kitchen to plan. "Come morning, we'll make our presence known to Sanderson when he returns for his answer." Naomi looked around at the determined faces of her neighbors, men who had known her father, who had their own grievances against Victor Sanderson, who understood the importance of standing together. "I don't want anyone getting hurt because of me," she said seriously. "This isn't just about you," one of the Peterson boys replied. "Sanderson's been trying to gobble up land all over the county. If he succeeds here, who's next? We're not just defending your ranch, Miss Reynolds. We're defending all our ranches." The night passed without incident, and dawn broke clear and cold. The men took up positions around the ranch house, visible enough to be seen by approaching riders but protected enough to defend themselves if necessary. Naomi, against Frank's advice, insisted on being on the porch when Sanderson arrived. "This is my home," she said firmly. "I'll not hide inside while others defend it for me." As the morning wore on into afternoon, tension mounted. Lookouts were posted on the surrounding hills, watching for Sanderson's approach. It was nearly 3 o'clock when the cry came from one of the lookouts. "Riders coming, at least a dozen from the west." Naomi stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, Frank Jenkins at her side. The other men moved to their positions, a grim determination settling over the ranch yard. Victor Sanderson appeared over the rise, leading what looked to be 15 men, his regular hands plus the hired guns they had seen the day before. He pulled up short when he saw the assembled defense at the Reynolds ranch, surprise and then anger crossing his features. "This is an unexpected development," he called as he rode closer, stopping at a safe distance. "I see you've been busy, Miss Reynolds." "Just enjoying the company of good neighbors," Naomi replied steadily. "Something you wouldn't understand, Mr. Sanderson." Sanderson's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the armed men positioned around the property. "This changes nothing. You're still outnumbered, and I doubt these farmers and small-time ranchers have the stomach for real fighting." "Why don't you test that theory?" Frank Jenkins called from beside Naomi. "My boy Toby still has a bullet hole in his shoulder that's made me mighty eager to return the favor." A tense silence fell as the 2 groups assessed each other across the yard. Naomi could feel the weight of the moment. One wrong move, one nervous trigger finger, and this standoff could explode into bloodshed. "I came for your answer, Miss Reynolds," Sanderson said finally, his voice cold. "Have you reconsidered my generous offer?" "I have," Naomi replied, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "And my answer remains no. This ranch is not for sale, not to you, not to anyone." Sanderson's face hardened. "Then you leave me no choice but to what, Sanderson?" A new voice interrupted. All eyes turned to see a group of riders approaching from the east, Quinn O'Malley in the lead. The two hired hands from the cattle drive behind him, and most surprisingly, 3 men wearing the distinctive badges of Texas Rangers. Quinn rode directly into the yard, positioning himself between Naomi and Sanderson's men. The Rangers fanned out beside him, their presence creating an immediate shift in the atmosphere. "Convenient timing, O'Malley," Sanderson said, his confident demeanor faltering slightly at the sight of the Rangers. "Not convenience. Planning." Quinn dismounted, moving to stand beside Naomi on the porch. "I figured you might make your move while I was away, so I took precautions." "The Rangers have no jurisdiction in local property disputes," Sanderson argued, though with less conviction. "This stopped being a local property dispute when you brought in hired guns from outside the territory." One of the Rangers responded, a stern-faced man with captain's bars on his collar. "That makes it a matter for Ranger jurisdiction. And then there's the matter of the attempted intimidation of multiple ranchers, the shooting of Toby Jenkins, and the cattle rustling incidents over the past month," another Ranger added. "Seems we have quite a list of matters to investigate, Mr. Sanderson." Sanderson's face had gone pale, his earlier confidence evaporating in the face of official scrutiny. "These are baseless accusations. I demand—" "You're not in a position to demand anything," the Ranger captain interrupted. "Now, I suggest you and your men disperse peacefully, or we can continue this conversation in the sheriff's office in town." For a moment, it seemed Sanderson might resist. Then, with a curt nod to his men, he turned his horse. "This isn't over," he said, glaring at Naomi and Quinn. "Not by a long shot." "Actually, I think it is," Quinn replied calmly. "The Rangers will be keeping a close eye on this county for the foreseeable future. Any further trouble will be dealt with swiftly." With a final look of impotent rage, Sanderson rode away, his men following reluctantly behind him. As the tension in the yard dissipated, Naomi turned to Quinn, questions in her eyes. "How? The cattle drive, you couldn't possibly have made it to the railhead and back in this time." Quinn smiled, taking her hands in his. "I didn't. We were about halfway there when we met a cattle buyer heading in the opposite direction. He offered a fair price on the spot, so we made the deal and turned back immediately. I had a feeling Sanderson wouldn't waste time once I was gone." "And the Rangers, old colleagues," Quinn explained. "I sent a telegram from the last town we passed through, explaining the situation. They were already on their way to investigate reports about Sanderson's hired guns." Relief and joy washed over Naomi as the reality of the situation sank in. The immediate threat from Sanderson had been neutralized, Quinn was back safely, and they had stood their ground without bloodshed. "I thought I'd have to face him alone," she admitted softly. Quinn squeezed her hands gently. "You're never alone, Naomi. Not anymore." He glanced around at the assembled neighbors. "And it looks like you did just fine gathering allies in my absence." As the ranchers and Rangers began to disperse, their immediate purpose fulfilled, Quinn drew Naomi aside, his expression suddenly serious. "There's something I need to tell you," he said quietly. "Something I realized while I was away." Naomi looked up at him, her heart quickening at his tone. "What is it?" "Being apart from you, even for just those few days, made me understand something I think I've known since the moment I helped you up from the dirt at that auction." Quinn's voice was low, meant only for her ears. I love you, Naomi Reynolds. Not because of a promise to your father or because of our partnership, but because of who you are, your strength, your determination, your heart. Tears filled Naomi's eyes as joy bloomed in her chest. I love you too, she whispered. I was going to tell you when you returned. I promised myself I would. Quinn smiled, tenderness in his eyes. Great minds think alike. As the sun began to set on what had nearly been a day of violence but had instead become a day of resolution, Quinn and Naomi stood together on the porch of the ranch house, watching as their neighbors and allies departed with promises of continued support. What happens now? Naomi asked, leaning against Quinn's solid presence at her side. With Sanderson, the Rangers will keep an eye on him, and I suspect his influence in the county will diminish significantly once word gets out about today. No, I meant with us, Naomi clarified, turning to face him. What happens now with us? Quinn took her hands in his expression serious but full of warmth. That depends on you, Naomi. I know what I want, but I won't presume to speak for you. Tell me what you want, she urged softly. I want to build a life here with you, Quinn said simply. To work this land together, to face whatever challenges come our way as partners in every sense. He paused, his eyes searching hers. I want to marry you if you'll have me. Naomi's heart soared at his words. Is this a proposal, Quinn O'Malley? A smile spread across his face. I suppose it is, though not the formal one I had planned. I intended to ask you properly, with a ring and perhaps not standing in a yard that nearly became a battlefield. Naomi laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. I don't need formality, just you. She stepped closer, her hands rising to frame his face. And my answer is yes. Of course it's yes. Quinn's arms encircled her waist as he drew her close, his kiss filled with promise and love. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. From the moment I lifted you from the dirt at that auction, I knew I never wanted to see you fall again, he murmured. I want to spend my life making sure you never do. And I never will, Naomi replied with certainty. Not with you beside me. As twilight settled over the Reynolds ranch, soon to be the O'Malley ranch, as well they stood together on the porch, looking out over the land they had fought to protect. It was more than just acres and cattle now. It was the foundation of their future, the place where they would build their life together. In the months that followed, much changed in San Elizario. True to Quinn's prediction, Victor Sanderson's influence waned significantly after the standoff at the Reynolds ranch. The Rangers' investigation uncovered evidence of multiple illegal activities, resulting in charges that kept Sanderson occupied in court rather than pursuing further vendettas. Quinn and Naomi were married in a simple ceremony at the ranch that December, surrounded by the neighbors who had stood with them against Sanderson. Sheriff Wilson presided, and Frank Jenkins gave Naomi away in place of her father. Robert would be proud, Frank told her as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Not just of the ranch, but of the woman you've become and the man you've chosen. As Naomi walked toward Quinn, who waited beside the fireplace in the parlor where they had shared so many conversations, she felt her father's presence keenly. The ranch house was filled with memories of him, but now it was also filled with promise for the future, her future with Quinn. The winter passed in newlywed bliss as they settled into their life together. Quinn moved from the bunkhouse to the main house, his presence filling the rooms with warmth and life. They worked side by side during the day and shared the intimate discoveries of marriage at night, their partnership deepening in all aspects of their life together. Spring brought new beginnings to the ranch. The cattle herd thrived under their joint management, and Quinn's experience combined with Naomi's knowledge of the land created a successful operation that grew steadily more prosperous. They hired 2 permanent hands to help with the expanding workload, allowing them to improve and extend the ranch's facilities. The bunkhouse that had been Quinn's temporary home became housing for their hired men, and Quinn built a new barn that had long been on Naomi's wish list for the property. Summer arrived with unexpected but joyful news. Naomi was expecting their first child, due in the early months of the following year. Quinn's reaction to the news was everything she could have hoped for. His joy and tenderness overwhelming as he held her close, whispering promises of love and protection for her and their unborn child. As her pregnancy progressed, Naomi found Quinn becoming increasingly protective, though he was careful never to limit her independence or question her capabilities. He simply took on more of the physical labor, ensuring she didn't strain herself unnecessarily. "I'm pregnant, not helpless," she reminded him one afternoon when he insisted on carrying a basket of eggs she had collected from the henhouse. "I know," Quinn replied with a smile, still not relinquishing the basket, "but indulge me. I've waited a long time for this kind of happiness, and I intend to savor every moment of it, including the chance to fuss over my wife." How could she argue with that? Instead, Naomi leaned up to kiss his cheek, her heart full of love for this man who had changed her life so completely. Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1875. A healthy, robust boy they named Robert Quinn O'Malley in honor of both Naomi's father and the man who had lifted her from the dust of that auction and into a life filled with love and partnership. Standing by the window of their bedroom, Quinn cradled his newborn son while Naomi watched from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "He has your eyes," Quinn observed, awe in his voice as he studied the tiny face. "And your stubborn chin," Naomi replied with a tired smile. "Poor child is doomed to be hard-headed." Quinn laughed softly, moving to sit beside her on the bed. "He comes from strong stock on both sides. He'll be a force to be reckoned with." As they gazed at their son together, Naomi reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, from the despair of the auction to the joy of this new life they had created together. What had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning, a chance meeting that had grown into a love deeper and more fulfilling than she could have imagined. "Quinn," she said softly, reaching out to touch his face, "do you remember what you said to me that day at the auction?" "When I was kneeling in the dirt," he nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I said it wasn't pity I was offering, but respect. And that was the moment everything changed," Naomi murmured. "The moment my life turned from ending to beginning." Quinn leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "For me as well, though I didn't recognize it at the time. I came to fulfill a promise to your father, but I found my future instead." Their son made a small sound, drawing their attention back to the tiny bundle in Quinn's arms. As they gazed at the new life they had created together, the past with its auctions and threats and struggles seemed distant, less important than the present moment and the future that stretched before them. The Reynolds O'Malley Ranch continued to flourish in the years that followed. Robert was joined by a sister, Elizabeth, 2 years later, and eventually by another brother, James, completing their family. San Elizario changed as well, growing more prosperous as the railroad expanded its reach and new settlers arrived. Victor Sanderson eventually sold his holdings and moved east, his ambitions thwarted and his reputation tarnished by the Rangers' investigations. The small ranchers who had stood together against Sanderson's threats formed a lasting alliance, cooperating on cattle drives and supporting each other through the inevitable challenges of ranch life in West Texas. The Reynolds O'Malley Ranch stood at the center of this community, a testament to the power of partnership and determination. On the 10th anniversary of the auction that had brought them together, Quinn and Naomi stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching their children play in the yard where once armed men had faced each other in standoff. 10 years, Naomi mused, leaning against her husband's sturdy frame. Sometimes it seems like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like another lifetime entirely. Quinn nodded, his arm secure around her waist. The best decade of my life, without question. Naomi looked up at him, at the face that had become as essential to her as breathing. There were a few more lines around his eyes now, a touch of silver at his temples, but the strength and kindness in his expression remained unchanged. "You ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't come to that auction?" she asked. Quinn considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But then I look at what we've built together." He gestured to the thriving ranch around them, to their children playing in the yard, "and I know it couldn't have been any other way. We were meant to find each other, Naomi." As the sun set over their land, casting long shadows across the place that had seen both their struggles and their triumphs, Naomi knew he was right. From the moment he had offered his hand to lift her from the dirt, their paths had been intertwined, their futures bound together by a love that had only grown stronger with each passing year. "I love you, Quinn O'Malley," she said simply, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "And I love you," he replied, gathering her closer. "Always have, always will." Together they watched as their children chased fireflies in the gathering dusk, their laughter floating on the evening air, the sound of a future made possible by a chance meeting, an act of kindness, and the love that had grown between a woman who had once knelt in the dirt and the cowboy who had lifted her up and never let her fall again.